All right, guys. So Unit 5B. Not a lot of math involved in this unit. In fact, it's a lot of evaluating language and looking at studies and what was done. So I guess the big question here is, should you believe a statistical study? So you're presented with a statistic, and the question is, should you believe it? Is it valid? Were things done in a way that it's represented correctly? So there's really 8 guidelines that the book covers, and I think they paint a pretty good picture of what you should be looking for. So I'm not going to read all 8 of them now. You can pause the video if you want and do a quick skim of what the 8 are. But these are just kind of the 8 different things that you should be asking yourself and considering when you look at the study. So number 1 is to get a big picture of the study. And really what this means is you're answering 3 questions. Okay, first of all, what was the goal of the study? What is it trying to show? Second, what was the population that it was studying? And was that population clearly and appropriate for what they were trying to do? And then, was the study an observation or an experimental study? And if it was experimental, is it single, double blind? And is that an appropriate study for what they're trying to do? So example 1 is one that we kind of talked about in class already. It says, imagine that there was a news report saying researchers gave 100 participants their horoscopes and asked whether those horoscopes appeared to be accurate. 85% of the participants answered yes. The researchers concluded that horoscopes are valid most of the time. So if we just consider guideline 1, what's the goal of the study? Well, the goal of this study is to find out if horoscopes are accurate. Okay. So that's all they're looking for. Are horoscopes accurate? That's kind of the end goal here. What was the population under study? So looking at this, it doesn't say anything about who the participants are or how they were chosen. It just says 100 participants. So we don't know where they came from, if they volunteered, if they were randomly chosen. We just know there's 100 of them. So that one's a little bit hard to answer with this question. Was the study observational? Well, it sounds like it's kind of somewhere in between. They didn't just observe what happened. They had 100 people go through this process. And the question really comes down to, was this study appropriate? And there's a couple of things that we have to be careful of, because they gave 100 participants their horoscopes and asked if they were accurate or not. Maybe, we don't know. We just asked, it just says, are they accurate? There's not a degree of accuracy. Was one thing mentioned accurate? Was the entire thing accurate? Accurate's kind of a vague definition right there. And not only that, but they only asked the people that they gave horoscopes to. In other words, there's kind of this missing piece to me, that this really should be an experiment, and they're missing that control group. They're missing that group of people who think they are getting their actual horoscope, but they're actually getting a fake horoscope, or they're getting something else. Without that second group, we don't really have anything to compare it to other than these 85 people that said their horoscope was accurate, which is pretty vague. Okay, so there's some things there that would raise some questions for sure. The guideline number 2 is to consider the source. All right. That in general, statistics are supposed to be objective, meaning that the people that are asking the question are not trying to get one answer or the other. They are just trying to get an answer. But in the real world, the people who carry these out are usually wanting one result or the other. That's why they're doing the study, is trying to figure out, am I getting this? Am I getting A or B? And they usually want one over the other. So you got to be really careful when you look at who is behind the study that's being done. So example 2 just gives us a little bit of history about some of these smoking and lung cancer studies. So it says in 1963, all this research started with the Surgeon General announcing that smoking is bad for your health. Research since then has been done, and it just continues to support this claim that smoking is bad for your body, right? However, even though most of the studies are saying this, there are a few that say that there's no dangers from smoking and that there's actually even good things, there's health benefits for smoking. When you look at these studies that are done, here's kind of the key to keep in mind. Those studies are usually performed by some sort of tobacco related research institute, and those are usually funded by tobacco companies because tobacco companies want their products to appear good and appeasing to people. They don't want their products to come across as bad and evil and causing harm, right? So their goal is to try and show that tobacco does not do these things, even if it does. So that right there, knowing that they're the ones that are giving this research institute money, would raise some serious questions for me as to how valid their research is. Okay. Number 3, look for bias in the sample. And there's a few different types of bias, but bias basically means when you selected this sample, was it a fair sample? Okay. So the 2 ways that this happens, one of them is selection bias. And this occurs, the 2 examples are right here for you if you want to copy some of that down. But this occurs when researchers select their sample in a way that might not represent the population they should. So it gives an example here where an election poll surveys only registered Republicans. Well, obviously, whatever they ask is going to be biased because they're only asking registered Republicans. And unless they only want a Republican's opinion, this is already a bias sample. Okay. It's kind of like that where we talked in class about if you were wanting to get the average height of students in the high school and you went and asked the basketball team what their heights were. Okay. You're skewing the results based on who you're choosing to be part of your sample. Participation bias is another one you have to be careful of because this is what happens when people choose to participate. And the reason you have to be careful about this is especially when it comes to something that is a hot topic or something people are really passionate about. A lot of times they are choosing to participate because they themselves want a specific result. They want to be a part of the study because they want to try and show one result over the other. They have a reason to want it to sway one way or the other. All right. So example 3, compare polling techniques. And if we go all the way back to our opening question from the other chapter, it gave all these different ways that you could take a poll. And it talked about if you just asked a bunch of people living on the same street, or if you asked every other person that drove by, or if you went to a specific neighborhood and you asked every other house in one neighborhood. And you're looking for where could we, even if it wasn't on purpose, you're looking at what techniques are going to create bias. Okay. And some of those, when you're looking at a poll, is if you're only asking one group of people. And it doesn't matter if that group is Republicans. It doesn't wow, Mr. Reed, Republicans. It doesn't matter if you are only asking old people. It doesn't matter if you are only asking men. It doesn't matter if you are only asking people in a certain college class. Is there something, is based on the sample that you took, is there a reason to assume or worry that there might be some bias in the way that things are being answered? This one is usually pretty easy to see. Okay, this one, usually when you start looking at the groups that they picked from, it's pretty easy to see. There's a lot of studies or a lot of statistics being thrown around right now about the benefits, or I guess most of them are saying the lack of benefits of homework. And basically, these studies are saying that instead of giving 40 problems on math homework, it's better to give 10 problems that are very different from each other and are harder than it is to give 40 problems that kind of practice the same skill over and over again. Both of these have their benefits. The problem is a lot of these studies, the groups that they're looking at, the samples that they're taking aren't real samples of most high school students. They tend to be sampling students that are higher achievers and students that are in honor classes, where doing 40 problems, doing the same thing over and over and over again, that group, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because a lot of times they only have to do it once and then they've got it, they understand that they can move on. But for a lot of people, that benefit of drilling, it's kind of like saying, oh, if you're good at basketball, you only have to practice shooting 1 3-point shot. It doesn't help you to practice 100 3-pointers. Because you're pretty good, just practice 1, which just doesn't make sense in general. But that sample, you've got to be careful of. Number 4, look for problems in the definition or measuring of the variables. So what the variables of interest means is, what is it that you're measuring? What is it that you're looking for? What's the variable that you are analyzing in this study? Okay, so when we talked about that Nielsen ratings study, they looked at what shows were being watched and how many people were watching them. So those were the variables. What is being watched and what is the number of viewers? Okay. And sometimes those variables can be, even if the study has a good idea, sometimes those variables can be hard to measure. Going back to that first example that we looked at, was your horoscope accurate? To me, that's very hard to measure, because a horoscope is usually not, let me tell you one thing and you tell me if that's accurate or not. Usually it's a couple of paragraphs. And within those couple of paragraphs, how do you measure if it was accurate? Was there, out of 10 things that were said in it, how many of those make it an accurate horoscope? Okay, so the other examples from the book, example 4, says that this study selected individuals who are among the richest 1% of Americans. And it said that on average, those Americans would pay almost $500,000 for true love. They would pay $407,000 for great intellect. They would pay $285,000 for some sort of talent. They would pay $250,000 for eternal youth. So when you start looking at this study, we're talking about money. That's pretty easy to measure. But applying a value to something like true love, first of all, that's a hard thing to do. That's kind of what they're looking at, is how valuable is true love to someone with a whole bunch of money. Well, true love itself is a pretty vague, open-ended statement right there. What is considered true love? Is that, hey, I have true love right now in this moment, or is that true love that's going to last forever? What exactly is true love defined as? And that's not an easy thing to define. Either is great intellect. Great intellect. Okay, so you're really smart. Well, how do you measure being really smart? Or how do you measure a talent? You can balance an egg on your nose. Okay, that's a talent. But these are hard things to measure. So that might create some worries if you were trying to use the statistics for something important. Okay. Example 5, I like a little bit better, because this just seems like a random poll that someone took, but they're not really trying to do much with it other than entertain you with random information. But example 5, a common quoted statistic is that law enforcement succeed in stopping only about 10% of the illegal drugs coming into the United States. Should you believe that? Well, how do they know that they're only stopping 10%? What that means is that's saying that 90% is missed. 90% of the drugs coming into the country are not stopped. Well, how do they know how much drugs are coming into the country if they're not stopping them from coming into the country? I mean, they can make assumptions. They can look at overdoses. They can look at arrests and where the drugs came from. They can make a lot of assumptions, but measuring what is coming into the country is really hard to do because it's coming in secretly. It's coming in illegally. No one is out there saying, oh, hey, by the way, I just transported 100 tons of heroin into the United States, just so that you can put that in your statistics. That's a hard thing to measure, okay? Guideline number 5, beware of confounding variables. And this one itself is difficult because what it means to be a confounding variable are variables that you don't really recognize are there, but they confound or confuse the result. Okay. And sometimes you don't even know these are an issue until years and years later when they find out, oh my gosh, there was something else going on that was making my results look different than they actually are. So sometimes there's these other variables and you know they're there, but you don't know how much it's affecting your study. Sometimes you don't even know it's happening and it's having an effect. So this example number 6, I think, does a pretty good job giving you an idea what we're looking at. So radon is a radioactive gas. It comes out of the ground. It leaches into buildings, and it can be toxic if it's not if it kind of builds up in concentration, if there's not a good air system or airflow that's spreading it out and eliminating it. So if they were doing a study to determine, does this gas cause lung cancer? And they were looking at people in Colorado with lung cancer and comparing that to people in Hong Kong with lung cancer. Well, in Colorado, because of the mountains and the land that it's built on, radon gas is more common than it is in Hong Kong. Okay. People are also spread out a lot more. And in Hong Kong, you have a whole bunch of people covering a small part of land, right? Well, if this study says that lung cancer in the two cities are the same, therefore, because there's a lot more gas in Colorado, but the lung cancer is the same in the two cities, it's not significant. Maybe that is one conclusion, but I don't know if it's fair to say that it's not having a part to play because we don't know what are the other causes of lung cancer. Like, for example, if you look at smoking, I do know that in Hong Kong, there's a lot more people smoking. And not only that, but there's a lot worse results from smoke because you have more people in a small area where there's not a place for the smoke to go other than right into your neighbor's nostrils. So because the smoking rate is higher in Hong Kong, could that be making the lung cancer rate appear to be higher, even though there's not as much radon? So the fact that there's other things causing lung cancer makes smoking a confounding variable, okay? Because that can confuse our results, even though it's not part of the study. Okay, number 6, consider the setting and the wording. Oh my gosh, is this one important? Okay, the setting and the wording in the surveys. So without trying to read this too much, a lot of times when people are asking questions in surveys, even though it's anonymous, if you pick a certain answer, you're being honest with yourself. And sometimes if you pick an answer, like the example here is, do you cheat on your income taxes? If you say yes, you are not only are you admitting that you did it, but the wording, did you cheat, has a very negative connotation, right? It's saying, hey, did you do, you're admitting, hey, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. And not only that, you're using a very strong word for it, okay? You cheated on your income taxes. That's a hard box for anyone to check, even if they know it's anonymous. So even though it might be true, you can't guarantee that it's accurate because of the way that it's worded. And it goes the other way. A lot of times things can be worded in a way that makes people want to choose it, even if they disagree. Okay. Another way the wording can happen, I like this example, number 7. There was a poll that asked, do you favor tax cuts? That's pretty vague. I think 100% of people would say, yes, I would love tax cuts because that means I have to pay less in taxes. But this kind of goes back to way back in the beginning of the class, we were talking about different sorts of ways that they kind of try to manipulate you into picking a certain answer. And one of those was, when we looked at those fallacies, one of them was worded that there's only one option. And this kind of does that. It's saying, do you either favor tax cuts or you don't? But it's really not that simple, because if you favor tax cuts, does that mean you don't believe in any of the things that taxes are going into? And interestingly enough, in this same poll, they asked how people felt. Let's see, how was it worded? What they felt about the national deficit, the amount of money that we owe. And they were upset that we owe money and that should be fixed. But you also are saying that you should cut taxes, okay? So this could be worded in a very different way so that you could answer it more accurately and actually get an idea, because just because you favor taxes being cut doesn't mean that you're willing to do it without knowing what the circumstances are and where that money's going to come from, because it's got to come from somewhere. We would all like to pay less taxes, but if that comes at the losing a program that you are in favor of or money going to a program that you enjoy, you might change your opinion. Okay. So the way this is worded is kind of leading people to say, well, duh, of course we all favor tax cuts, but that doesn't mean, just because we want them doesn't mean that that's going to be the best option and we would choose it. Okay. Guideline 7, check that the results are presented fairly. So this one says that really this is just looking at, okay, based on the information from the study, are they giving you the results in a fair way? And we're not going to talk about this example too much. You can read through that, but I want to share an example that I kind of had to deal with when I was actually going to college here at Dixie. So I had a statistic presented to me in one of my classes. It was a class that was all about trying to create an equal and fair environment for students, for teachers, for men, for women, for different races, different religions. It was basically all about trying to create this equal playing field. And in that class, there was a statistic thrown out in the textbook. And the statistic said that men and women if you looked at men and women with a bachelor's degree from college, if you looked at men and women with a bachelor's degree, men made more money. That's what this textbook said. Men with a bachelor's, women with a bachelor's, the men make more money. And then it went on, based on that information, that statement, it went on for multiple pages to argue how the workplace is unfair to women because men with bachelor's degree are making more than women with bachelor's degrees. And that really didn't sit well with me, because in a lot of my experience in the real world is I've seen men and women working, and I've seen it go the other way as often as I've seen it represented as it is here. And so as the class was discussing and arguing and talking about this statistic and what it meant, I looked up the study, I found it online, and started reading through the study. And the study, what it actually said, it said that men with a bachelor's make more money on average than women with a bachelor's. And then there was this great big but right after. And it said that was based on the fact that they concluded that this was true because the men with bachelor's degrees were working in jobs that paid more money than the women with bachelor's degrees were working in. So instead of comparing a teacher to a teacher, or a male accountant to a female accountant, or a man who is a engineer to a woman who is an engineer, all they compared was bachelors to bachelors. And in general, the kind of jobs that men tend to go for, and again, this isn't obviously everybody, but the jobs that men were going and getting were higher paying jobs than what the women were going and doing. A lot of the women were going into teaching and into nursing and into other jobs that the job itself pays less than some of the jobs that the men were going into. And my issue with that is, in this study, right there on the front page of the study, after it concluded that this is true, not only did they say that they based that their conclusion recognized that men and women were working in different jobs, it went on to say that if they compared the same degree, if they said, okay, instead of just saying a bachelor's degree, because there are 100 different bachelor's degrees that you can get, and they are not equal. It's not like everyone with a bachelor's goes out and makes the same amount of money. One job pays more than another. And so what they did is in this study itself, it said when they compared men and women with the same degree, not just a bachelor's, but the same bachelor's degree and similar jobs, the women actually made more money. So in the study itself, it acknowledged that men were making more on average than women with a bachelor's. But if you compared the same job, the same degree with each other, they actually noticed that women were making more on average than the men. And my issue with that is, even though the study itself acknowledged this fact right here, my teacher and my textbook was ignoring this and trying to argue this conclusion without mentioning anything else. So even though the study did everything it was supposed to do, it followed all the rules, it did everything correct, someone using that study left out some pretty big information, which I went on to share with the class, and it wasn't appreciated very much by my professor, but that's an issue to me. When statistics are presented without knowing where it came from, that's something I've been passionate about forever. So even as a student, when statistics came up, I would go look them up and share what actually was being said. And sometimes a lot of times it was exactly what we thought was being said. But examples like this one are very misleading, even though the study itself was a very good, honest study that was being done. Okay, number 8, stand back and consider the conclusions. And part of, next to this, I would just say, how does it sit in your stomach? Okay? How's that sit in your tummy? So you read this study and you find out all of these statistics and you look at all these guidelines, and in the end, you don't see anything blatantly questionable. But you lay there at night and you just still don't feel like that makes sense, okay? Take a step back and consider what the conclusion is and how, if it's really as significant as it looks, and what else could be going on, okay? First of all, did this study achieve its goals? Did it find what it was trying to prove or disprove? Does those conclusions make sense? So going back to that homework study, does doing less homework improve students' scores make sense at all? You show me one place in life where practicing less makes you better, and we can talk. But that doesn't sit well with me. I don't care if it's a sport. I don't care if it's driving a car. I don't care if it's a class subject, math or science or reading or anything else. It doesn't sit well with me to argue that practicing less is actually better. Okay, that doesn't sit well. Can you rule out alternative explanations? Okay, could there be other reasons why, even though the study and everything about it looks legit, are there other reasons why it might appear that way? Okay, and that's one that's hard to see, especially because a lot of these things are being done in a way to try to keep you from seeing what's really going on, right? And if the conclusions do make sense, is it really significant or not? Okay, I love this example. It compares a new diet supplement with just some other ways of losing weight. And as far as this study goes, it says that things were done correctly. They had a control group, they had the treatment group. Everything was done up to par. And the result was that this fast diet supplement, on average, the people using that supplement lost 1/2 pound more than the others. Therefore, this supplement plan is better. Okay, is that really significant? Well, maybe. Maybe it's not an issue to you the way that this diet works. But what if this diet requires you to spend a lot of money, or to eat something really gross, or to work out more than you want to? What if this diet requires you to do a lot of things that you really don't want to do compared to these other diet options? And the only difference is an average of 1/2 pound. Even though that's true, even though this is working better, is that 1/2 pound really significant when you're looking at the amount of weight that a person is losing? And that's kind of the good reason, that last question. Okay, if everything adds up, if you can't find any issues, how significant is that result to you in your life? Is that significant enough that you're going to go change the way that you're living or something that you're doing? Or is that as minute as, oh, I would lose 1/2 pound more, that's it? All right, so this kind of wraps up homework, or at least the information for homework 5C. Like I said, really no math involved at all. It's just going to be a lot of opinions and trying to get down to what's going on in a study and where there might be some questions to be found. Actually, not homework C. Sorry, guys, this is homework 5B, right? Go do homework 5B, and then if you really want, do homework C too.